She's just living off her late husband's money, my son-in-law said loud enough for everyone at the barbecue to hear. And just like that, the laughter spread across the backyard like it belonged there. I didn't look up right away. I kept my eyes on the grill, flipping the burgers one by one, watching the grease sizzle and pop like it had something to say that I didn't. The smell of charcoal hung thick in the warm July air, mixing with cheap beer and the sound of country music playing from a speaker someone had set on the patio table. It was supposed to be a family afternoon. Emily had insisted. Just something small, Mom, she said. You'll love it. I should have known better. I heard a few chuckles, then a louder one. Jason's friend, I think. The kind of laugh that lingers too long, like it's trying to impress someone. I placed another patty down, steady, careful, like my hands had something more important to focus on. I mean, come on, Jason added, taking a sip from his bottle. She hasn't worked in what, 10 years? Must be nice, right? There it was again. That tone. Casual. Almost playful. The kind that lets a man say something cruel and pretend it's just a joke if anyone calls him out. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I reached for the spatula, pressed it down gently on the meat, listening to the quiet resistance. Behind me, someone shifted in their seat. No one corrected him. No one told him to stop. Not even my daughter. Especially not my daughter. I glanced over just once. Emily was sitting near the patio table, her legs crossed, her glass of iced tea resting between her fingers. She smiled. Not at me. At something Jason had just said under his breath that made the group lean in closer. That smile, polite, distant, felt sharper than anything he had said out loud. I turned back to the grill. The sun sat high, casting long shadows across the lawn. Kids were running barefoot through the grass, chasing each other with plastic cups, their laughter clean and untouched by whatever was happening just a few feet away. I used to think this was what family looked like. Noise, warmth, people gathered together for no reason other than being connected. Now it just looked like a stage. And I was. The only one who didn't know my role had changed. Hey Margaret, Jason called out suddenly, louder this time, like he needed an audience. You ever think about downsizing? I mean, that house is a lot for one person. A few heads turned. Waiting. Watching. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, taking my time before I answered. I managed just fine, I said, my voice even, almost too calm for what had just been said. He smirked. Sure. I guess when you've got money just sitting there, everything's easy. Money just sitting there. I let the words settle. Not because they were true, but because they told me exactly what he thought. What he'd always thought. I reached for the tray and started placing the finished burgers on it, one by one, neat, deliberate. The kind of careful movement that keeps everything from spilling over. I could feel it now, under the surface. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something colder. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that waits. Somewhere behind me, my phone vibrated against the table. I didn't check it right away. Jason was still talking, still performing, his voice rising and falling like he owned the space, like this backyard, this house, this entire afternoon belonged to him. I picked up the tray and turned toward the table, setting it down without a word. My phone buzzed again. This time, I glanced at the screen. One message. Short. Direct. I'm here. Should I come in? I didn't react. I just locked the screen and placed the phone back down. Then I looked up, past Jason, past the laughter, toward the driveway. And for the first time that afternoon, I smiled. I did not rush to the driveway. I did not call out or wave. I simply reached for the pitcher of lemonade and began refilling glasses like nothing had changed, like the air had not just shifted in a way no one else seemed to notice yet. Jason kept talking, of course he did. Men like him always fill silence before it has a chance to turn on them. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair, one arm stretched across the backrest like he owned more than just his seat. It is a different world now. You have got to stay relevant. Otherwise you just kind of fade out. A few nods. A few polite smiles. Someone murmured agreement. I handed a glass to one of his friends, a young man who avoided my eyes as he took it. Thank you, he said quietly, almost like he meant it. Jason did not notice. He was too busy watching himself in the reflection of everyone else's attention. Emily shifted in her seat, adjusting her sunglasses even though the sun had dipped slightly behind the trees. Jason's just saying things are changing, Mom, she added, her voice light, careful, like she was smoothing over something that did not need to be said in the first place. I nodded once. Things always change, I replied. Nothing more. I did not give them anything to push against. That was the part they never understood. You cannot win against someone who refuses to play the game you set up for them. The screen door creaked softly behind me as a breeze moved through the house, carrying with it the faint scent of polished wood and something cooler, quieter than the noise outside. My phone remained still on the table now. No more messages. He was waiting. I could feel it without looking. Timing matters. It always has. Jason stood up, stretching his arms like he was preparing for something bigger than a backyard conversation. Hey, he called out again, louder now, drawing more attention. Let me ask you something, Margaret. Real question. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Do you actually understand how any of this works? Like business, investments, all that? Or did your husband just handle everything? The laughter came quicker this time. Not as loud, but easier. Familiar now. Practiced. I picked up a napkin and folded it once, then again, aligning the edges carefully before placing it beside the tray. I understand enough, I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. He tilted his head, amused. Enough to what? He pressed. Enough to stay comfortable? There it was again. That word. Comfortable. As if it had been handed to me. As if I had simply stepped into a life already built and never once carried its weight. I looked at him then. Not long. Just enough. Just long enough for him to realize I was actually seeing him, not just listening. And in that brief moment, something flickered across his face. Not fear. Not yet. Just uncertainty. It passed quickly. He laughed it off, waving a hand. I mean, no offense. It is just different generations, right? No one responded this time. The music kept playing, but softer now, like it had taken a step back. Even the kids had drifted further into the yard, their voices distant. I reached for my glass, took a small sip, and set it back down. Then, without saying a word, I turned my head slightly toward the driveway. Gravel shifted. A car door closed. Slow. Deliberate. Not the rushed movement of someone unsure if they belonged. The kind of movement that assumes space will be made. Jason heard it too. His body stiffened almost imperceptibly, his shoulders tightening before he could stop himself. He glanced over, then quickly back at the group, like he was trying to decide if it mattered. It did. The gate clicked open. Footsteps followed. Measured. Steady. Not hurried. Not hesitant. I did not move. I did not greet him. I simply waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the moment arrive on its own. The footsteps did not rush, and that was the first thing everyone noticed without saying it out loud. There is a difference between someone who arrives hoping to be welcomed and someone who arrives knowing they already belong, and Robert Miller had always carried himself like the second kind. He stepped through the gate with a simple nod, dressed in a dark navy suit that did not match the casual afternoon, but somehow did not look out of place either, a leather briefcase in his left hand, his posture straight, his expression composed. Conversation slowed, then stopped. Even Jason's voice, which had filled the yard just seconds ago, seemed to disappear mid-thought. I did not turn fully toward him right away. I let the silence settle first. It stretched across the patio, over the table, into every pair of eyes that suddenly did not know where to look. Robert approached with measured steps, stopping just a few feet from me before speaking. "Good afternoon, Ms. Collins," he said, his voice calm, respectful, the kind of tone that carries weight without needing volume. I inclined my head slightly. "Good afternoon, Robert," I replied. Nothing more. No explanation. No introduction. Just a name. That was enough. Jason blinked, his confidence slipping for the first time all afternoon. "Dad?" he said, the word coming out sharper than he intended. "What are you doing here?" Robert glanced at him briefly, then back at me, as if the answer to that question was not his to give. "You asked me to bring the documents," he continued, opening the briefcase with steady hands. Paper shifted. Clean. Organized. Intentional. I watched Jason's face as he tried to piece it together. His eyes moved from me to the briefcase, then back to his father, searching for something familiar, something that would put him back in control of the moment. He did not find it. "Wait," Jason said, stepping forward now, his tone tightening. "What documents?" No one laughed this time. No one spoke. Emily lowered her glass slowly, her eyes moving between us, confusion beginning to replace that polite distance she had worn all afternoon. Robert removed a folder and held it with both hands, but he did not hand it to Jason. He held it toward me. "These are the finalized acquisition agreements, ma'am," he said. "Everything is ready for your review." There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear, precise. I took the folder without rushing, my fingers brushing against the smooth edge of the paper as I opened it slightly, enough to confirm what I already knew was inside. Numbers, signatures, authority. I closed it again. Jason took another step closer, his voice lower now, controlled, but only just. "Acquisition? What acquisition?" he asked, looking directly at me this time. I met his gaze evenly. "The company you work for," I said. No emphasis, no pause. Just the truth, placed exactly where it needed to be. His expression shifted. Not all at once. It started in his eyes, a flicker of disbelief that quickly gave way to something heavier. Calculation. Then uncertainty. "That does not make any sense," he said, shaking his head slightly, as if rejecting it would somehow change it. You do not," he stopped. Because he did not know what I did. He never had. Robert spoke again, filling the silence with quiet precision. "Ms. Collins is the majority stakeholder, Jason," he said, his tone unchanged, as if he were explaining a simple fact that had always existed. "She has been for quite some time." The words landed softly, but they stayed. I watched Jason as everything he had said earlier in the afternoon seemed to echo back at him, not as jokes now, but as something else entirely, something he could not easily laugh off. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to correct him. I simply stood there, holding the folder, letting the truth speak in its own time, in its own way, until there was nothing left for him to misunderstand. No one moved right away. That was the strange part. It was as if the entire backyard had forgotten what came next, like a conversation that had been cut in half, and no one knew how to finish it. Jason let out a short laugh, but it did not land the way his others had. It sounded thinner, forced. "Okay," he said, glancing around at the group as if expecting someone to join in, to help him reshape the moment into something lighter. No one did. "That is funny," he added, though his eyes were not on me anymore. They were on his father. "Dad, you do not have to do this. Whatever this is." Robert did not respond to him immediately. He simply stood where he was, his attention steady, his posture unchanged. There was no embarrassment in his expression, no apology, only quiet acknowledgement of the situation as it existed. That seemed to unsettle Jason more than anything else. Emily finally spoke, her voice softer now, uncertain. "Mom, what is he talking about?" I turned my head slightly toward her, just enough to meet her eyes. For a moment, I saw something familiar there. Not the distance from earlier. Something closer to the girl who used to sit at my kitchen table, asking questions she did not yet have answers for. "I invested," I said simply. "Years ago." I did not explain how many years. I did not list the nights spent reviewing numbers, the meetings no one ever knew about, the decisions made quietly while others assumed I was simply keeping busy. Some things do not need to be explained to be understood. Jason shook his head again, more firmly this time, like he was trying to push the truth away before it could settle. "No," he said. "That is not how this works. I would know if something like that was happening." I closed the folder and held it lightly in my hands. "Would you?" I asked. Not sharply, not accusing, just a question. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because he did not have an answer that could hold up in the space we were standing in now. Around us, the small sounds of the afternoon began to return, but differently. A chair shifted. A glass was set down more carefully than before. Someone cleared their throat. The music continued, but no one seemed to be listening to it anymore. Jason looked at his father again, this time searching for something else. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, his voice lower now, the edge replaced by something closer to disbelief. Robert met his gaze, calm as ever. "It was not my place to discuss client matters outside of work," he said. "You know that. Client matters." The phrase settled into the air with a weight Jason could not ignore. Not employer, not boss, client, professional, separate, controlled. It drew a line that had not existed for him just minutes ago. I watched him as that line became real in his mind, as the easy confidence he had carried all afternoon began to shift into something more careful, more measured. "So what? This is some kind of test," Jason said, though his voice no longer carried the same certainty. You show up here with paperwork just to prove a point? I tilted my head slightly, considering him. I did not ask him to come here to prove anything, I said. I asked him to come because the timing was convenient. The truth, again. Simple. Direct. He let out a breath, but it did not steady him. Convenient, he repeated quietly. The words sounded different now, as if he were hearing it for the first time. Emily stood up slowly, stepping closer, her attention fixed on the folder in my hands. Mom, she said, her voice more careful now, why did you not tell us? I looked at her, really looked this time. You never asked, I replied. It was not said with bitterness. It did not need to be. The answer was complete on its own. And for the first time that afternoon, there was nothing left in the space between us that could be covered by laughter or brushed aside as a joke. The silence did not break all at once. It loosened slowly, like something unraveling thread by thread. Jason stepped back, just half a step, but enough for it to be noticed. His hands, which had been so relaxed earlier, now hovered awkwardly at his sides before he shoved them into his pockets. A small movement, but it said everything. This is not, he started, then stopped, pressing his lips together like he was trying to reorganize his thoughts into something that still made sense. You are making this sound bigger than it is. I did not respond immediately. I set the folder down on the table, right beside the tray of burgers that had gone untouched since Robert arrived. The food had cooled. The moment had not. It is exactly what it is, I said. My voice remained even. No emphasis. No sharp edges. That was what made it land. Jason let out a breath through his nose, a quiet, controlled exhale that did not quite hide the tension building underneath. So what? He said, his tone shifting again, searching for ground that would hold him. You bought some shares. That does not mean you control anything. Robert did not correct him. He did not need to. I reached for the folder again and opened it, turning it slightly so that Jason could see the first page. Not the details. Just enough. The company name. The signatures. The percentage. He leaned forward despite himself. Just for a second. That was all it took. His eyes moved quickly, scanning, then stopping. I watched the exact moment it registered. His jaw tightened. Not in anger. In understanding. Majority, he said quietly, almost under his breath. I closed the folder again. Yes. That was all. Around us, no one pretended anymore. The earlier laughter had disappeared completely, replaced by something quieter, more careful. People were listening now, not because they wanted to be entertained, but because they did not want to miss what came next. Emily took another step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason, is that true? He did not answer her right away. His eyes stayed on the folder, then shifted to his father again, as if hoping for a different version of reality to appear. It did not. You work there, he said to Robert, his tone sharper now, but not as confident as before. You would have told me if something like this was happening. Robert met his gaze without flinching. I follow company policy, he said. You know that. The same answer. The same calm. Jason's shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, but in the quiet realization that the structure he thought he understood had never included him the way he believed. I picked up my glass again, took a small sip, and set it back down. Simple movements. Grounding. You said something earlier, I said, looking at him, about understanding how things work. He glanced at me, wary now. Careful. Yes, he replied, slower this time. I remember. I nodded once. This is how it works. I did not need to say more than that. The meaning settled on its own. He looked away first. Not dramatically, just a shift of his eyes, like he needed a second to think without being seen. His friends avoided looking at him now. The same people who had laughed just minutes ago now studied their drinks, their phones, anything that did not reflect what had just changed. Emily wrapped her arms loosely around herself, her earlier composure replaced by something quieter, something closer to uncertainty. Mom, she said again, softer this time. Why did you not tell us about any of this? I looked at her, steady. Because it was not necessary, I answered. Until now. Jason let out another breath, this one less controlled. So what happens now? He asked, his voice lower, stripped of the casual edge it had carried all afternoon. I held his gaze for a moment, not to challenge him, not to intimidate him, but to make sure he understood that this was not a performance. That depends, I said calmly. And I left it there. Jason did not answer right away. He stood there, looking at me as if he was trying to measure something he had never needed to consider before. Not money, not status, something else, something quieter, the kind of weight that does not announce itself, but changes the room anyway. He shifted his stance, glancing briefly at the people around him, then back at me. Depends on what? He asked, his voice steadier now, but only because he was forcing it to be. I did not rush to respond. I picked up the napkin I had folded earlier and adjusted it slightly, aligning it again with the edge of the table. Small things matter. They always have. On how you choose to carry yourself, I said finally. No threat. No raised voice. Just a statement. He frowned, not out of anger, but because the answer did not give him anything solid to push against. That is not very clear, he said. It is not meant to be complicated, I replied. It is actually very simple. I let the words settle before continuing. The way you speak to people. The way you treat them when you think no one important is watching. That tells me everything I need to know. His jaw tightened slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. I was joking, he said quickly, almost too quickly. Everyone here knows that. No one spoke. No one confirmed it. The silence answered for them. I tilted my head slightly. Were you? I asked. Again, not accusing. Just asking. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because now he understood the difference between something said casually and something heard clearly. Emily took a step closer to him, her voice low, uncertain. Jason, she started, but did not finish. She did not need to. He raised a hand slightly, stopping her without looking at her. His attention stayed on me. So what are you saying, he asked. That this affects my job? There it was. Not respect. Not family. Not the things he had dismissed earlier. Now it was about consequence. I held his gaze, steady. I am saying that character always matters, I answered. In every room. Not just the ones you think are important. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, the movement less controlled than anything he had done earlier. The confidence was not gone, but it was no longer effortless. This is not fair, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. You cannot just show up and change everything because of one conversation. I shook my head slightly. Nothing changed today, I said. You just became aware of it. That landed differently. He looked down for a moment, then back up, searching again for something that would restore the balance he had walked in with. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Around us, the afternoon had settled into a different kind of quiet. The music still played, but no one adjusted the volume. The food remained on the table, untouched. Even the children, now further away near the fence, seemed distant, like they belonged to another version of the day. Robert remained. Where he was, silent, composed, his presence steady without needing to be reinforced. He had done his part simply by showing up. Jason glanced at him again, then back at me. So what happens next? He asked, more carefully this time. Not demanding. Not dismissive. Careful. I considered him for a moment. Not to test him. Not to prolong the moment. Just to see if he understood what was actually being asked. Then I spoke. That depends on what you do next, I said. And this time, I let the words rest exactly where they belonged. Jason did not speak immediately after that. For the first time since the afternoon began, he seemed to understand that whatever came next would not be shaped by quick words or clever remarks. He looked at me, really looked this time, not as someone to impress or dismiss, but as someone he needed to read carefully. All right, he said finally, his voice lower, more controlled. Then let me ask you directly. He took a step forward, not aggressive, but deliberate. What exactly do you expect from me? I held his gaze without shifting. The question was not surprising. It was inevitable. People like Jason always look for rules once they realize they are no longer setting them. I placed my hands lightly on the edge of the table, grounding myself in the moment, in the space that had changed without needing permission. I do not expect anything complicated, I said. Just consistency. He frowned slightly. Consistency. I nodded once. The same respect you show in a boardroom, I continued, should exist in your own backyard. The same awareness of who you are speaking to should not disappear just because you think it is casual. He let out a quiet breath, glancing briefly at the people around him, then back at me. So this is about respect, he said. It was always about respect, I replied. No hesitation. No embellishment. Just the truth. Emily shifted closer again, her voice careful, almost hesitant now. Jason, maybe you should just, she started, but stopped herself. unsure how to finish the sentence. He raised his hand again, not sharply, but enough to pause her. No, he said, still looking at me. I want to understand this. That was new. Not defense. Not dismissal. Understanding. It came late. But it came. You said earlier that nothing changed, he continued. That I just became aware of it. I nodded slightly. Right. He swallowed, the movement subtle but visible. Then what happens if I had never known? There was a moment of stillness after that. Not tension. Not conflict. Just a quiet space where the answer mattered more than the question. Then this would have continued exactly as it was, I said. And I would have continued to observe. He blinked, caught off guard by that. Observe. I gave a small nod. You learn a lot about people when they think there are no consequences, I said. It is often the most honest version of them. That stayed with him. I could see it. Not as resistance this time. As recognition. He looked down briefly, then back up, his expression no longer guarded in the same way. And now, he asked. I did not rush. I did not soften the moment either. Now you have the opportunity to decide if that version of you is the one you want to stand behind, I said. He did not answer right away. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, just present. Around us, the others remained still, listening without pretending not to. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Even the breeze seemed quieter, moving through the trees without drawing attention to itself. Jason finally exhaled, slower this time, his shoulders lowering just slightly. I crossed a line, he said. The words were simple. No excuses. No conditions attached. I watched him for a moment, measuring not just what he said, but how he said it. Then I nodded once. Yes, I replied. Nothing more. No lecture. No repetition. Just acknowledgement. Because sometimes that is all that is needed for the truth to settle where it belongs. The words did not echo, but they stayed. Jason stood there, the weight of what he had just said settling into the space around him, not as a performance, not as a reaction, but as something quieter, something that could not be taken back or reshaped. I watched him, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with the kind of stillness that comes from understanding exactly where a moment stands. All right, he said after a pause, his voice steady but lower than before. Then I will say it clearly. He straightened slightly, not in pride, but in intention. I was out of line. I should not have spoken to you that way. No one interrupted. No one filled the silence. It was his moment, and for once, he did not try to decorate it. I gave a small nod. Thank you, I said. Simple. Direct. Enough. Emily exhaled softly beside him, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction, as if she had been holding something in place without realizing it. She looked at me, her eyes searching, but not for answers this time. For something else. Something closer to reassurance. I did not offer it right away. Some things need time to settle before they are softened. Jason glanced briefly at his father, then back at me. I do not expect this to fix everything, he added, more carefully now. I understand what you were saying. I tilted my head slightly. Do you? I asked. Not to challenge him. To make sure. He nodded once. Yes, he said. It is not about the job. It is not about the company. It is about how I showed up today. That was closer. Not perfect, but closer. I reached for the folder and closed it fully, placing it back on the table, not as a symbol, not as a threat, but as something that no longer needed to speak for me. That is right, I said. Everything else is separate. He absorbed that quietly, his earlier tension now replaced by something more measured, more aware. Around us, the atmosphere began to shift again, but this time in a different direction. Chairs moved. Someone cleared their throat and reached for a drink. The music, which had been ignored, seemed to find its way back into the background. Not loud, just present. The children's laughter drifted back into focus, carried lightly across the yard like it had never left. I picked up the serving tray and adjusted it slightly, straightening what had been left untouched. The food is getting cold, I said, my tone calm, almost ordinary. It was not a dismissal. It was an invitation to return to something simpler, something human. Jason hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, reaching for a plate. Let me help, he said, his voice quieter now, without the edge it once carried. I handed him the tongs without comment. He took them carefully, like they carried more weight than they actually did. Emily moved beside him, picking up napkins, aligning them the way she used to when she was younger, before everything became so complicated. Robert remained where he was for a moment longer, then closed his briefcase with a soft click. "I will leave you to your afternoon, ma'am," he said, his tone respectful as always. I gave a slight nod. "Thank you for coming, Robert." He inclined his head and turned, walking back toward the gate with the same steady pace he had arrived with. No rush. No hesitation. Just presence, from beginning to end. Jason watched him go, then looked back at me, something unspoken passing through his expression before he lowered his gaze again, focusing on the simple task in front of him. I did not need to say anything else. The moment had already done its work. The afternoon did not return to what it had been before. It moved forward into something quieter, something more deliberate. The laughter came back, but softer. Conversations resumed, but with pauses that had not existed earlier. I stood by the table, watching as Jason worked beside Emily, handing out plates, asking simple questions, listening more than he spoke. It was not a dramatic change. It was not meant to be. Real change rarely announces itself. It shows up in smaller ways. In what is not said. In what is chosen instead. I reached for a glass and poured myself some lemonade, the ice shifting gently as it settled. The sun had begun to lower now, casting a warmer light across the yard, softening the edges of everything it touched. For a moment, I simply observed. Not as someone removed from the scene, but as someone who understood it more clearly than before. Jason approached after a while, slower this time, without the need to draw attention. He stopped a few feet from me, not too close, not distant either. I meant what I said. He began, his voice steady, but quieter than anything he had used earlier in the day. About being out of line. I nodded once. "I know." He hesitated, then continued. "I think I got used to talking without thinking about how it lands." He glanced briefly toward the others, then back at me. "That is not an excuse. Just something I need to fix." I studied him for a moment, not searching for flaws, not expecting perfection, just listening. "Awareness is where it starts," I said. "What you do with it is what matters." He took that in without arguing, without trying to reshape it into something easier. That alone told me more than anything he could have said earlier. Emily joined him, standing just beside him now, her presence no longer distant. "Mom," she said softly. I should have said something earlier. I looked at her, the weight of her words settling differently than his. "Yes," I replied gently. Not harsh, not dismissive, just honest. She nodded, her eyes lowering briefly before meeting mine again. "I will next time," she said. I believed her, not because she said it, but because of how she said it. The afternoon continued around us, the small rhythms of it finding their place again. Plates were filled. Chairs were pulled closer together. Someone turned the music up just enough to be heard again. It was not the same gathering it had started as, but it was not meant to be. I picked up the folder from the table, holding it lightly for a moment before setting it aside on a nearby chair. It no longer needed to sit between us. It had already done what it needed to do. Jason noticed the movement, his eyes following it briefly before returning to me. "I do not want things to be tense like this," he said carefully. "Between us." I met his gaze, steady. "Then do not make them that way," I answered. Simple, clear. He let out a small breath, almost a nod to himself more than to me. "Fair enough," he said. No pushback, no attempt to negotiate, just acceptance. The light shifted again, the sky beginning to take on the soft tones of early evening. Conversations blended together now, easier, more natural. The moment that had divided the afternoon no longer needed to be revisited. It had already changed what it needed to change. I stepped slightly away from the table, looking out over the yard, at the people gathered, at the space that had held both tension and resolution in the span of a few hours. For a long time, I had been seen as someone who simply existed within these moments. Today, that had shifted. Not because I forced it, not because I explained it, but because I allowed it to be seen. And that was enough.